James Montgomery's polished leather shoes clicked against the rain-slicked sidewalk of downtown Vancouver. The crisp autumn air nipped at his cheeks, a stark contrast to the stuffy boardrooms he'd left behind in Toronto. At 42, James had built Technova, a multi-million-dollar corporation, from a scrappy startup in his garage. His salt-and-pepper hair and tailored charcoal suit exuded success. But the slight furrow in his brow betrayed the weight of responsibility he carried. As he navigated the crowded street, his mind wandered to the upcoming merger. James was in Vancouver to oversee the acquisition of Quantum Leap, a promising AI firm that would solidify Technova's position in the market. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the small figure huddled in the alcove of a closed storefront. A woman sat on a threadbare blanket, her shoulders hunched against the cold. Two children, a boy and a girl, no older than 8 or 9, clung to her sides. The woman's head was bowed, long strands of unkempt hair obscuring her face. A cardboard sign propped against her knees read, "Please help, children hungry." James's steps faltered. Something about the scene tugged at his memory. A long-forgotten chord of recognition. He found himself moving closer, drawn by an inexplicable force. "Spare some change." The woman's voice was barely above a whisper, rough with disuse. James reached for his wallet, ready to drop a few bills into the battered paper cup at her feet. But as he bent down, the woman lifted her face, and time seemed to stand still. Familiar hazel eyes, once bright with laughter, now dulled by hardship, met his gaze. The sharp intake of breath was audible as recognition dawned on both their faces. "Abigail!" James's voice was a mixture of disbelief and shock. The woman's eyes widened, a flicker of fear passing across her features. "James," she breathed, instinctively pulling her children closer. For a moment, the bustling city faded away. James felt as though he'd been transported back in time to a small cafe in Montreal where he'd first met Abigail Laurent, a vivacious art student with dreams as big as her smile. But the woman before him now was a far cry from the Abigail he remembered. Her once radiant skin was pale and drawn, dark circles shadowing her eyes. The children, wide-eyed and wary, looked up at James with a mixture of curiosity and fear. "Mom." The little boy tugged at Abigail's worn jacket. "Who is he?" Abigail swallowed hard, her gaze never leaving James's face. "An old friend," she murmured, her voice catching on the words. James's mind raced, struggling to reconcile the successful, vibrant woman he'd known with the desperate figure before him. Questions flooded his thoughts, but he pushed them aside, acutely aware of the curious glances from passers-by. "Abigail," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "Let me help you. Please." She hesitated, pride and desperation warring in her eyes. The little girl sneezed, a harsh sound that seemed to jolt Abigail back to reality. "Okay," she whispered, nodding slowly. "Okay." As James helped Abigail and her children to their feet, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken an unexpected turn. The merger, the acquisition, the empire he'd built, all of it seemed to fade in importance as he guided this small, broken family towards his waiting car. Little did he know, this chance encounter was about to change everything. As James's chauffeur navigated the sleek black sedan through Vancouver's rain-slicked streets, an uncomfortable silence hung in the air. Abigail sat rigidly in the back seat, her children pressed close on either side. James couldn't help but steal glances at her profile, his mind reeling with memories. Montreal, 2005. The scent of freshly ground coffee and the soft strains of jazz filled the air of Le Café des Artistes. James, then a bright-eyed business student, had been captivated by the auburn-haired girl laughing with her friends at a nearby table. Her sketch pad was open, filled with vibrant drawings that seemed to dance off the page. "Excuse me," he'd said, gathering his courage. "I couldn't help but notice your artwork. It's incredible." Abigail had looked up, her hazel eyes sparkling with amusement. "Thank you," she'd replied, her smile warm and inviting. "I'm Abigail James, he'd responded, feeling as though he'd just stepped into the best chapter of his life. The memory faded as the car hit a pothole, jolting Jamesney back to the present. He cleared his throat, searching for words to break the tension. "Benjamin and Emily, right?" he asked gently, addressing the children. The boy nodded cautiously, while the girl buried her face in her mother's side. Abigail's hand tightened on Emily's shoulder. "Yes," she said softly. "Ben is 9, and Em is 7. Jamesney nodded, his heart aching at the fear and uncertainty in their eyes. "I've arranged for us to stay at a hotel nearby," he explained. "You'll be able to rest, get cleaned, uppy, and have a good meal." Abigail's eyes flashed with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "Why are you doing this, Jamesney?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken history. Jamesney took a deep breath, memories flooding back once more. Their whirlwind romance had been the stuff of fairy tales. Late nights discussing art and business dreams, weekends exploring Montreal's hidden gems, and stolen kisses in the shadow of Mount Royal. But as graduation loomed, their paths had begun to diverge. "I've been offered a position with a tech startup in Toronto," Jamesney had told her one crisp autumn evening, much like this one. "It's an incredible opportunity, Abby. I can't pass it up." Abigail's face had fallen, her dreams of pursuing her art in Paris crumbling before her eyes. "And what about us?" she'd asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come with me," Jamesney had pleaded. "We can make it work. I know we can." But Abigail had shaken her head, tears glistening. In her eyes, "I can't, Jamesney. My life is here. My art is here. I can't give up on my dreams." The memory of their goodbye at the train station still haunted him. The taste of salt on her lips, the feeling of her fingers slipping from his grasp. Jamesney blinked, forcing himself back to the present. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, meeting Abigail's gaze in the rearview mirror. "And because I never stopped caring about you, Abby." She held his look for a long moment before nodding, a flicker of the old trust passing between them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As the car pulled up to the hotel, Jamesney couldn't shake the feeling that he was being given a second chance. A chance to right old wrongs and perhaps find redemption for the choices of his younger self. But as he watched Abigail gather her children close, he realized that the road ahead would be far from easy. The hotel suite was a far cry from the cold streets where Jamesney had found Abigail and her children. Warm lighting cast a soft glow over plush furnishings, and the scent of fresh linens filled the air. Yet, as Abigail stood in the center of the living area, she seemed more lost than ever. "To make yourselves at home," Jamesney said gently. "I've arranged for some clean clothes to be brought up, and room service will be here shortly with dinner." Benjamin and Emily exchanged wide-eyed glances, their small hands still clutching their mother's worn jacket. "It's okay," Abigail murmured to them. "Go on, explore a little." As the children tentatively began to investigate their surroundings, Abigail sank onto the edge of a nearby armchair. The weight of her circumstances seemed to press down on her shoulders, and Jamesney's heart clenched at the sight. "Abby," he said softly, using the old nickname without thinking. "What happened?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and resignation. "Life happened, Jamesney. Life and a series of very bad decisions." Over the next hour, as the children bathed and changed into clean clothes, Abigail's story unfolded. After their breakup, she had thrown herself into her art, eventually catching the eye of a promising young gallery owner named James. They had fallen in love, married, and for a while, life had been good. "James was so supportive of my work," Abigail said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "We had dreams of opening our own gallery someday. But fate had other plans. James was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, and their world came crashing down. Medical bills piled up, savings dwindled, and Abigail found herself struggling to care for her dying husband and their 2 young children. "He fought so hard," Abigail whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "But in the end, it wasn't enough. James died 2 years ago, and I just couldn't keep it together after that." Jamesney listened, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. He thought of his own life over the past decade, the success, the wealth, the accolades. It all seemed hollow in the face of Abigail's suffering. I tried to keep painting, to sell my work, Abigail continued. But the market was tough, and with 2 kids to feed. She trailed off, shaking her head. We lost the house, then the car. I picked up odd jobs where I could, but it was never enough. And then, last month, we lost our apartment. The weight of her words hung in the air between them. James's mind raced, trying to process the series of tragedies that had befallen this woman he once loved. "Abby, I'm so sorry," he said, reaching out to take her hand. "I had no idea." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "How could you? We haven't spoken in years, Jamesney. Our lives took very different paths." Before Jamesney could respond, there was a knock at the door. Room service with their dinner. As the aroma of hot food filled the suite, Benjamin and Emily emerged from their rooms, eyes wide with wonder. "Is that for us?" Ben asked hesitantly. Jamesney nodded, forcing a smile. "All of it. Eat as much as you like." As the children dug into the meal with barely contained enthusiasm, Abigail watched them, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. In that moment, Jamesney made a decision. "I want to help," he said quietly, so only Abigail could hear. "Not just tonight, but for as long as you need. Please, let me do this." Abigail turned to him, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude, pride, and fear. "Jamesney, You don't have to decide right now," he assured her. "Just think about it. For the kids, if nothing else." As they watched Benjamin and Emily eat their fill for the first time in what was clearly too long, a fragile hope began to blossom in the room. Jamesney knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but looking at Abigail, at the strength and resilience that had allowed her to survive so much, he felt certain that this was where he was meant to be. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight streaming through the hotel suite's large windows. Jamesney, who had spent a restless night on the living room sofa, awoke to the sound of muffled giggles. He opened his eyes to find Benjamin and Emily peering at him from behind the arm of a nearby chair. "Good morning," he said, sitting up with a smile. The children ducked away, still shy but clearly more at ease than the day before. Abigail emerged from the bedroom, looking refreshed after a night of proper rest. "I'm sorry if they woke you," she said softly. Jamesney shook his head. "Not at all. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Abigail admitted, a hint of color in her cheeks. "Jamesney, I've been thinking about your offer." Before she could continue, there was a knock at the door. Jamesney answered it to find a concierge, with a cart laden with breakfast foods, fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, and steaming pots of coffee and hot chocolate. As they sat down to eat, Jamesney couldn't help but notice the way Benjamin and Emily's eyes widened at the spread before them. They ate with the desperate hunger of those who had gone without for far too long. "I've made some calls," Jamesney said, addressing Abigail. "There's a clinic nearby that can see the kids today, just for a checkup, and I've arranged for some more clothes to be delivered." Abigail nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "But Jamesney, we can't impose on you like this. You've already done so much." Jamesney reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "Abby, please, let me help. Not just for old times' sake, but because it's the right thing to do." Abigail's eyes met his, searching for any hint of ulterior motive. Finding none, she slowly nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "But we need to talk about everything." Jamesney agreed, and they spent the morning at the clinic, where both children received thorough checkups and necessary vaccinations. The doctor, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, pulled Jamesney aside while Abigail was with the kids. "They're undernourished," she said quietly, "and Emily has a mild case of pneumonia. We're starting her on antibiotics, but they'll both need follow-up care." Jamesney nodded, his heart heavy. "They'll get it," he promised, "whatever they need." Back at the hotel, New clothes arrived, practical, warm outfits for all three of them. As Emily twirled in a new dress, her face lit up with a smile that transformed her. For the first time, Jamesney saw a glimpse of the carefree child she should have been all along. That evening, after the children were asleep, Jamesney and Abigail sat on the balcony of the suite, the lights of Vancouver twinkling below them. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words and lingering questions. "Why did you really help us, Jamesney?" Abigail asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is it guilt? Pity?" Jamesney took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Partly, yes," he admitted. "I've always wondered what might have been if I'd made different choices back then. But it's more than that, Abby. Seeing you again, it's made me realize how empty my life has been, despite all the success." Abigail nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the city below. "I won't lie, Jamesney. Part of me is angry. Angry that you've had all this success while I've struggled. But I'm not the same person I was back then either. We've both made choices, good and bad. I want to help you get back on your feet," Jamesney said. "No strings attached. I can offer you a job at one of my companies here in Vancouver. It's an entry-level position in the HR department. But it comes with health benefits and a salary that could help you start over." Abigail was quiet for a long moment, her fingers toying with the hem of her new sweater. "And what about us?" she finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What are we to each other now?" Jamesney reached out, gently taking her hand. "Friends, for now," he said softly. Maybe more, someday. But right now, what's important is giving you and the kids a fresh start." Tears welled up in Abigail's eyes, but she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes. Thank you, Jamesney." As they sat there, hands clasped and gazes turned towards the future, both Jamesney and Abigail felt a spark of something they hadn't dared to feel in years. Hope. Over the next few weeks, a tentative routine began to take shape. Abigail started her new job at Technova's Vancouver office, throwing herself into the work with determination. The children were enrolled in a nearby school, their eyes bright with excitement on their first day. Jamesney, having extended his stay in Vancouver indefinitely, found himself increasingly involved in their lives. He helped Benjamin with his math homework, listened to Emily practice her reading, and spent long evenings talking with Abigail after the kids had gone to bed. But beneath the surface of their newfound stability, tension simmered. Abigail struggled with feelings of inadequacy, acutely aware of the disparity between her life and Jamesney's. The children, while grateful for their improved circumstances, grappled with the loss of their father and the sudden presence of Jamesney in their lives. One evening, as Jamesney and Abigail sat in the hotel suite's living room, the weight of unspoken words hung heavy between them. "I saw James today," Abigail said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Jamesney looked up, sharply. "What do you mean?" "Not literally," Abigail clarified, her voice thick with emotion. "But there was a man at work. He had the same laugh. For a moment, I thought." She trailed off, tears welling in her eyes. Jamesney moved to sit beside her, hesitantly placing a hand on her shoulder. "Tell me about him," he said gently. "About James." Abigail took a shaky breath. "He was kind. Funny. He could light up a room with his smile. When I met him, I was still hurting from us. But James, he saw past all that. He believed in my art when I'd almost given up on it." As Abigail spoke, painting a picture of the man she'd loved and lost, Jamesney felt a complicated mix of emotions: jealousy, guilt, and a deep sadness for what Abigail had endured. "He sounds like he was a wonderful man," Jamesney said softly. Abigail nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "He was. And sometimes I feel like I'm betraying him by accepting your help. By feeling something for you again." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and fear. Jamesney took a deep breath. "Abby, But before he could continue, Benjamin appeared in the doorway, his young face creased with worry. "Mom, I had a bad dream." Abigail immediately stood, moving to comfort her son. As she led Benjamin back to his room, Jamesney was left alone with his thoughts, acutely aware of the delicate balance they were all trying to maintain. The next day, determined to address the underlying tensions, Jamesney suggested a family outing to Stanley Park. As they walked along the seawall, the fresh ocean breeze and the majesty of the towering cedars seemed to lift everyone's spirits. Emily skipped ahead, chasing seagulls, while Benjamin hung back, his expression thoughtful. Jamesney slowed his pace to walk beside the boy. "Everything okay, Ben?" he asked gently. Benjamin was quiet for a moment before responding. "Are you trying to replace our dad?" he asked bluntly, his young voice trembling slightly. Jamesney felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. He crouched down to Benjamin's level, meeting the boy's eyes. "No, Ben, I'm not trying to replace your dad. No one could ever do that. Your dad will always be a part of you and your sister, and that's how it should be." "Then why are you helping us?" Benjamin pressed, his brow furrowed. Jamesney considered his words carefully. "Because your mom is an old friend, and I care about her. And because I've come to care about you and Emily, too. I'm not trying to be your new dad, Ben. I'm just trying to be a friend, someone who can help make things a little easier for all of you." Benjamin nodded slowly, seeming to process this information. "Okay," he said finally. "I guess that's all right." As they continued their walk, Jamesney felt a mix of relief and trepidation. They were making progress, but the road ahead was still fraught with emotional landmines. As autumn deepened, bringing a chill to the Vancouver air, Abigail found herself increasingly torn between gratitude for Jamesney's help and a fierce desire to reclaim her independence. The job at Technova, while stable, left her creatively unfulfilled. Her fingers itched for a paintbrush. Her mind swam with colors and compositions she longed to bring to life. One rainy Saturday afternoon, while the children were engrossed in a movie, Abigail slipped away to the bedroom she shared with Emily. From the depths of her battered suitcase, she withdrew a small sketchbook, the one possession she hadn't been able to part with, even in their darkest times. As she began to draw, the world around her faded away. The scratch of pencil on paper was a balm to her soul. Each line, a step towards reclaiming a part of herself she'd thought lost forever. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear Jamesney enter the room. It wasn't until he spoke that she startled, nearly dropping the sketchbook. "Abby, that's incredible," Jamesney breathed, his eyes wide as he took in the half-finished sketch. A hauntingly beautiful depiction of Benjamin and Emily, their faces a mixture of hope and sorrow. Abigail instinctively moved to hide the drawing, years of insecurity rising to the surface. But Jamesney gently caught her wrist, his touch sending a jolt through her. "Don't," he said softly. "Please, I'd love to see more." Hesitantly, the Abigail allowed Jamesney to look through the sketchbook. Page after page revealed the journey of the past few years. Moments of joy amidst the hardship, the raw pain of loss, and the unwavering love for her children that had sustained her through it all. "You never lost your talent," Jamesney said, his voice thick with emotion. "If anything, it's grown stronger." Abigail shook her head, tears pricking at her eyes. "It doesn't matter. Art doesn't pay the bills, Jamesney. I learned that the hard way." Jamesney was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "What if it could?" he asked finally. "What do you mean?" "I have connections in the art world, Abby. Gallery owners, collectors. Let me show them your work. You could have a show, start selling your pieces again." Abigail's heart raced at the possibility, but fear held her back. "I don't know, Jamesney. It's been so long. And what if I'm not good enough?" Jamesney took her hands in his gaze intense. "You are good enough, Abby. You always were. Let me help you believe in yourself again." As they sat there, surrounded by the evidence of Abigail's rekindled passion, something shifted between them. The air seemed to crackle with unspoken emotions and possibilities. Abigail set down her sketchbook, turning to face Jamesney fully. "Why are you really doing all this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is it just guilt, or is it Something else? James's breath caught in his throat. He knew his answer could change everything between them. It started as guilt, he admitted. But now, Abby, seeing you again, getting to know Benjamin and Emily, it's made me realize what I've been missing all these years. But before he could finish, Emily's voice called out from the living room. Mom! Dad! Jamesney! The movie's over! The moment shattered, leaving both Jamesney and Abigail breathless with the weight of what had almost been said. As they made their way back to the children, Abigail's mind raced with conflicting emotions. Hope, fear, and a growing realization that her heart, which she'd thought safely locked away, was beginning to awaken once more. In the weeks that followed, Abigail threw herself into her art with a passion she hadn't felt in years. Jamesney, true to his word, had converted a small room in their suite into a makeshift studio, complete with easels, canvases, and a rainbow of paints. The children quickly learned to tiptoe past the door, respecting their mother's newfound sanctuary. One evening, as Abigail stood before a large canvas, brush in hand, Jamesney appeared in the doorway. He watched in silent awe as she worked, her movements graceful and sure. The painting before her was a stark departure from her earlier work, a swirling, abstract piece dominated by deep blues and violent reds. It's intense, Jamesney said softly, not wanting to startle her. Abigail turned, a smudge of blue paint on her cheek. It's everything I couldn't say before, she replied, her voice low. All the anger, the fear, the grief, it's all here. Jamesney nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. It's beautiful, Abby, raw, but beautiful. She gave him a small smile, the first genuine one he'd seen in days. Thank you. For this. For everything. As they stood there, surrounded by the evidence of Abigail's rekindled passion, Jamesney felt a familiar warmth spreading through his chest. He opened his mouth to speak, but Abigail beat him to it. Jamesney, I think I'm ready. To show my work, His face lit up with a grin. That's fantastic, Abby. I'll make some calls tomorrow. We'll set up a meeting with Sarah Chen. She owns that new gallery in Gastown. Abigail's eyes widened. Sarah Chen, but she only shows established artists. Trust me, Jamesney said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. Once she sees your work, she'll be begging to represent you. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Abigail selected her best pieces, framed them with Jamesney's help, and tried to quell the butterflies in her stomach. The morning of the meeting dawned bright and clear, but Abigail's nerves were frayed. What if she hates it? She fretted, pacing the living room. What if this is all a huge mistake? Jamesney caught her gently by the shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. Abby, listen to me. Your work is incredible. You've poured your heart and soul into these pieces. Sarah would be a fool not to see that. Abigail took a deep breath, nodding. Okay, I can do this. The gallery was a sleek, modern space in the heart of Gastown. Sarah Chen, a petite woman with a sharp eye and sharper tongue, greeted them coolly. But as she examined Abigail's paintings, her expression softened. These are remarkable, she said finally, turning to face Abigail. The emotion, the technique, it's all here. Ms. Laurent, I would be honored to show your work. Abigail's eyes filled with tears of joy and relief. As Sarah outlined the details of the upcoming show, Jamesney stood back, his heart swelling with pride. This was the Abigail he remembered. Passionate, talented, full of life. Later that night, as they celebrated with a quiet dinner after the children were in bed, Abigail reached across the table to take Jamesney's hand. I couldn't have done this without you, she said softly. Jamesney shook his head. You had it in you all along, Abby. I just helped you remember that. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years between them seemed to fall away. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Jamesney leaned in. Their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss that quickly deepened, years of unspoken feelings pouring out in a single moment. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Abigail's eyes were shining with unshed tears. I never thought I'd feel this way again, she admitted. Jamesney pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair mixed with the tang of oil paints. Neither did I, he murmured, but I'm so glad we have this second chance. As they held each other, both knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, they were ready to face it. Together. The day of Abigail's gallery opening arrived, bringing with it a mix of excitement and trepidation. The children, dressed in their best clothes, fidgeted nervously, as Jamesney helped them with their ties. Remember, he said gently, tonight is about celebrating your mom's hard work. Just be yourselves, and everything will be fine. Benjamin nodded solemnly, while Emily twirled in her new dress. Will there be fancy snacks? She asked, her eyes wide. Jamesney chuckled. Yes, there will be fancy snacks, but don't fill up. We'll have a proper dinner afterward. As they made their way to the gallery, Abigail was uncharacteristically quiet. Jamesney reached over to squeeze her hand. Nervous? He asked softly. She nodded, offering a shaky smile. Terrified. What if no one likes my work? They will, Jamesney assured her. But even if they don't, it doesn't matter. You've already won by putting yourself out there again. The gallery was buzzing with activity when they arrived. Sarah Chen greeted them warmly, ushering Abigail around to meet potential buyers and art critics. Jamesney hung back with the children, watching proudly as Abigail came alive under the attention, her passion for her art shining through. As the evening wore on, Benjamin tugged at Jamesney's sleeve. Can I talk to you? He asked, his young face serious. They found a quiet corner, and Benjamin took a deep breath. Are you going to be our new dad? He asked bluntly. Jamesney felt his heart skip a beat. He crouched down to Benjamin's level, choosing his words carefully. Ben, I care very deeply for your mom and for you and Emily, but I know I could never replace your dad. He'll always be a special part of your lives. Benjamin nodded slowly. But you make Mom happy, and I guess you're not so bad. Jamesney felt a lump form in his throat. Thank you, Ben. That means a lot to me. As they rejoined the crowd, Jamesney caught sight of Abigail across the room. She was radiant, gesturing animatedly as she explained a painting to a captivated group. Their eyes met, and she flashed him a brilliant smile. Later that night, as they tucked exhausted children into bed, Abigail pulled Jamesney aside. When I sold 3 paintings, she whispered, her eyes shining with tears of joy. And Sarah wants to discuss a long-term contract. Jamesney pulled her into a tight embrace. I'm so proud of you, Abby. You did this. You made it happen. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, both knew that they had reached a turning point. The past few months had been a journey of healing, of rediscovery, and of learning to trust and love again. Abigail looked up at Jamesney, her expression serious. Where do we go from here? She asked softly. Jamesney cupped her face gently in his hands. Wherever you want, Abby. I'm in this for the long haul. You, the kids, all of it. If you'll have me. Abigail's answer was a kiss, full of promise and hope for the future. As they held each other close, the sounds of the city faded away, leaving only the beating of their hearts and the quiet breathing of sleeping children. The soundtrack of a family finding its way back together. As winter settled over Vancouver, bringing with it a blanket of snow and crisp, clear days, the newly formed family faced the challenge of truly integrating their lives. Jamesney had officially moved in with Abigail and the children, trading his sleek downtown condo for the warmth and chaos of family life. The transition wasn't without its bumps. Emily, initially thrilled by Jamesney's constant presence, began to show signs of jealousy, demanding more of her mother's attention. Benjamin, on the other hand, grew quieter, retreating into books and his own thoughts. One frosty morning, as Abigail prepared breakfast, Emily threw a tantrum, refusing to get dressed for school. I don't want to go, she wailed, stamping her foot. I want to stay home with you and Jamesney. Abigail, exhausted from a late night of painting, felt her patience wearing thin. Emily, please. We've talked about this. You need to go to school. As Emily's cries escalated, Jamesney stepped in, crouching down to the little girl's level. "Hey, Em," he said softly. "What if we made a deal? If you go to school today without any more fuss, we'll have a special movie night tonight, just you and me. How does that sound?" Emily sniffled, considering the offer. "Can we have popcorn?" Jamesney grinned. "Extra butter." With the crisis averted, Abigail shot Jamesney a grateful look. But, as she turned to check on Benjamin, she found him staring at the scene with a frown. "You okay, Ben?" she asked, reaching out to smooth his hair. He shrugged, pulling away. "Fine," he muttered, grabbing his backpack and heading for the door. That evening, after Emily had fallen asleep, curled up next to Jamesney on the couch, Abigail found Benjamin in his room, hunched over a photo album. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly, sitting beside him on the bed. "What are you looking at?" Benjamin wordlessly pushed the album towards her. It was open, to a page of family photos: James, Abigail, and the children at the beach, all smiles and sunburned noses. "Do you think Dad would be mad?" Benjamin asked, his voice small. Abigail felt her heart constrict. "Mad about what, honey?" "About Jamesney. About us being happy without him." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes as she pulled her son close. "Oh, Ben, your dad loved you so much. All he ever wanted was for us to be happy. I think he'd be glad we found Jamesney." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment before speaking again. "I'm scared I'll forget him," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Abigail hugged him tighter. "We won't let that happen," she promised. "We'll keep talking about him, looking at pictures. He'll always be a part of our family. Ben, always." As Benjamin finally drifted off to sleep, Abigail made her way to the living room, where Jamesney was cleaning up the remnants of the movie night. "Tough day," he said softly, pulling her into an embrace. Abigail nodded against his chest. "They're struggling with all the changes. I hope we're doing the right thing." Jamesney pulled back slightly, meeting her gaze. "We are," he said firmly. "It won't be easy, but we're in this together. We'll figure it out." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Abigail felt a sense of peace settle over her. They were building something beautiful, even if the process was sometimes painful. Spring brought with it a sense of renewal and possibility. Abigail's art career was flourishing, with a second successful show under her belt and commissions rolling in. Jamesney had managed to strike a balance between his work at Technova and his new role as a family man, often working from home to be more present for the children. One sunny afternoon, as they walked home from picking up the kids from school, Jamesney cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking," he began, "about our future." Abigail raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what grand plans have you concocted this time, Mr. Montgomery?" Jamesney chuckled, but his eyes were serious. "What would you think about moving? Not far, just out of the city a bit. Somewhere with more space, maybe near the water." Abigail was quiet for a moment, considering. "I don't know, Jamesney. The kids are just settling into their school. My studio?" "I know it's a big change," Jamesney said quickly. "But hear me out. I found this amazing property in West Vancouver. It's right on the water, with a guest house that could be converted into a studio for you. The schools in the area are excellent. And—" He trailed off as he realized Abigail had stopped walking. She was staring at him, an unreadable expression on her face. "Abby?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "What is it?" "You're really in this for the long haul, aren't you?" she said softly. Jamesney nodded, reaching for her hand. "I am. The kids. You're my family now. I want to build a life with you, if that's what you want too." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes, but she was smiling. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do it. Let's move to West Vancouver." The news was met with mixed reactions from the children. Emily was thrilled at the prospect of a bigger room and a yard to play in. Benjamin, however, was more hesitant. "Will I have to change schools?" he asked, his brow furrowed. Jamesney nodded. "Yes, but the schools in West Vancouver are some of the best in the province, and think of all the new friends you'll make." Benjamin considered this for a moment, before nodding slowly. Okay. But can we still visit Dad's grave sometimes? Abigail pulled him close. Of course we can, sweetheart. Any time you want. The move itself was a whirlwind of activity, packing up their lives, saying goodbye to neighbors, and preparing for a new chapter. As they stood in the empty apartment on their last night, surrounded by boxes, Jamesney pulled Abigail aside. I have something for you, he said softly, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Abigail's breath caught in her throat. Jamesney. He opened the box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring, surrounded by small diamonds. This isn't a proposal, he said quickly. Not yet, but it's a promise. A promise that I'm committed to you, to our family, to our future together. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here, waiting to make it official. Tears streamed down Abigail's face as she nodded, allowing Jamesney to slip the ring onto her finger. I love you, she whispered, pulling him close, for a kiss. As they broke apart, they heard a small giggle from the doorway. Emily stood there, grinning widely, with Benjamin beside her, a small smile on his face. Does this mean you're getting married? Emily asked excitedly. Abigail and Jamesney exchanged glances, then looked back at the children. Not yet, Abigail said softly. But someday. For now, we're just promising to be a family, all of us together. Is that okay with you two? The children nodded, and as Jamesney and Abigail gathered them into a group hug, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family. The move to West Vancouver brought with it a flurry of changes and adjustments. The new house, perched on a bluff overlooking the Strait of Georgia, was a far cry from their cramped apartment in the city. Abigail's converted studio, with its wall of windows facing the water, quickly became her sanctuary. As summer progressed, the family settled into new routines. Benjamin and Emily, initially apprehensive about their new school, soon found themselves making friends and thriving in their classes. Jamesney, true to his word, worked primarily from home, his presence a constant source of support and stability. One warm evening, as they sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues, Abigail turned to Jamesney with a serious expression. I think it's time, she said softly, twisting the promise ring on her finger. Jamesney's heart skipped a beat. Time for what? He asked, though he had a feeling he knew the answer. Abigail took a deep breath. Time to make it official. To get married. Joy bloomed in Jamesney's chest, but he tempered his reaction, aware of the weight of this indecision. Are you sure, Abby? There's no rush. I meant what I said. I'll wait as long as you need. She nodded, her eyes shining with certainty. I'm sure. These past months, they've shown me that what we have is real and lasting. I want to build our future together, officially. Jamesney pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Then let's do it. Let's get married. The next challenge was breaking the news to the children. They gathered Benjamin and Emily in the living room, both adults nervously anticipating their reactions. We have something important to tell. You, Abigail began, reaching for Jamesney's hand. Emily's eyes widened. Are we getting a puppy? Jamesney chuckled. Not quite, Em. Your mom and we've decided to get married. There was a moment of silence as the children processed this information. Then Emily launched herself at them, wrapping her arms around both adults. Finally, she exclaimed. Benjamin, however, remained quiet, his expression unreadable. Abigail felt her heart constrict. Ben, she said softly, how do you feel about this? The boy was quiet for a long moment before speaking. Does this mean Jamesney will be our dad now? Jamesney crouched down to Benjamin's level, his voice gentle but firm. Ben, I will never try to replace your dad. He will always be your father, and an important part of your life. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be a dad to you too, in my own way. Benjamin considered this, then slowly nodded. Okay, he said softly. I think Dad would be okay with that. As they pulled Benjamin into the family hug, Abigail felt tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. They were taking a big step, but they were doing it together. The wedding was a small, intimate affair held in the backyard of their new home. Close friends and family gathered to witness Jamesney and Abigail exchange vows against the backdrop of the shimmering strait. Emily, resplendent in a flower girl dress, scattered rose petals down the makeshift aisle. Benjamin, looking dapper in a suit that matched Jamesney's, proudly carried the rings. As Abigail walked towards him, radiant in a simple white dress, Jamesney felt his breath catch in his throat. This moment, this woman, this family, it was everything he never knew he needed. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Abigail and Jamesney had written their own vows, each promising not just to love and cherish each other, but to continue building their family with patience, understanding, and unwavering commitment. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering, as they sealed their vows with a kiss, officially becoming husband and wife, and legally solidifying their family unit. The reception that followed was joyous and relaxed. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the proceedings, Jamesney clinked his glass for a toast. "I want to thank all of you for being here today," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "But most of all, I want to thank Abigail, Benjamin, and Emily. You've shown me what true family means. You've filled a void in my life that I didn't even know existed." He turned to the children, who were seated at the head table with them. "Ben, Emily, thank you for allowing me into your lives, for teaching me the joys of fatherhood. I promise to always be there for you, to support you, and to love you as my own." Benjamin and Emily beamed up at him, their eyes shining with a mix of happiness and unshed tears. Finally, Jamesney turned to Abigail. "And Abby, my love, my partner, my best friend, thank you for this second chance, for showing me that it's never too late to find true happiness. I love you more than words can express," as applause erupted. Abigail stood to join Jamesney. "I'd like to say something too," she said, her voice wavering slightly. She took a deep breath before continuing. "When I lost James, I thought my chance at happiness was gone forever. But life had other plans." She smiled at Jamesney, squeezing his hand. "Jamesney, you came into our lives when we needed you most. You've helped me rediscover my passion, my strength, and my capacity to love again." Turning to her children, Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "Ben, Emily, you are the lights of my life. Thank you for your resilience, your love, and for embracing this new chapter in our lives. I know your dad would be so proud of you both." As the night wore on, filled with laughter, dancing, and the warmth of family and friends, Jamesney and Abigail stole a moment alone. Standing at the edge of their property, overlooking the moonlit water, they held each other close. "Happy?" Jamesney asked softly, pressing a kiss to Abigail's temple. She nodded, a contented smile on her face. "More than I ever thought possible." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms and surrounded by the love of their family, both Jamesney and Abigail knew that this was just the beginning of their greatest adventure yet. 5 years later, the Montgomery family stood on the deck of their West Vancouver home, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Charlotte, now a precocious 4-year-old with Abigail's artistic flair and Jamesney's determination, chased fireflies in the yard below. Abigail leaned against Jamesney, her head on his shoulder. "Can you believe how much has changed?" she asked softly. Jamesney wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Sometimes I still think I'm going to wake up and find it was all a dream," he admitted. Benjamin, now a lanky teenager with a passion for environmental science, joined them on the deck. "Mom," he said, "I got an A on my art project. Thanks for the help." Abigail beamed with pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I knew you had it in you." Emily emerged from the house, her nose buried in a book. At 13, she had blossomed into a thoughtful young woman with a gift for storytelling. "Dad," she said, looking up, "can you proofread my essay later?" "Of course," Jamesney replied, marveling at how naturally the word "dad" now fell from her lips. As they stood there, a family united by love rather than just blood, Jamesney reflected on the twists of fate that had brought them together. Abigail's art career had soared, with her work now featured in galleries across North America. He had found a balance between his business pursuits and family life, realizing that true success was measured not in dollars, but in moments like these. "I love you," he murmured to Abigail, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you too," she replied, her voice filled with contentment. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold, the Montgomery family gathered close, grateful for the second chances and unexpected blessings that had led them to this moment of perfect happiness. In the yard, below, Charlotte's laughter rang out as she caught a firefly, its soft glow illuminating her delighted face. It was a fitting metaphor, Jamesney thought, for the light and joy their blended family had brought into each other's lives. As night fell and stars began to twinkle overhead, they made their way inside, Charlotte sleepily requesting a bedtime story about how Mommy and Daddy met. Abigail and Jamesney exchanged fond glances, knowing that their journey, from chance, encounter to true love, was a tale worth telling again and again. The story of the Montgomery family was one of resilience, of hope rekindled, and of love that could overcome any obstacle. It was proof that sometimes life's greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages, and that it's never too late for a new beginning. What did you think of the story? Leave a comment and rate the story from 0 to 10. What rating would you give it and why? 2 buttons will appear next to it. One to subscribe, if you haven't already, and the other to watch other interesting stories. Choose one. Thanks for watching this far. See you soon.